The ocean is a vast, silent graveyard, a keeper of secrets that are often swallowed whole, never to surface again. For centuries, mariners have whispered tales of phantom vessels, of ships that drift aimlessly with shredded sails and empty decks, and of crews that vanish into the ether. But there is one story that stands apart from the folklore of the Flying Dutchman or the Mary Celeste. It is a story not of disappearance, but of a discovery so gruesome, so scientifically baffling, that it strains the very limits of credibility while remaining terrifyingly grounded in the dark realities of post-war history. This is a narrative of chemical warfare, of international cover-ups, and of a distress signal that still echoes in the nightmares of those who know the code. Welcome to DCF Investigations. Tonight, we are setting our course for the treacherous waters of the Strait of Malacca to dissect the most disturbing maritime mystery of the 20th century. We are peeling back the layers of the SS Ourang Medan incident. To understand the horror of what happened, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of the time. The year is generally cited as 1947, though some archival records suggest early 1948. The world was still reeling from the devastation of World War II. The Pacific Theater had been a bloodbath, and although the peace treaties were signed, the waters of Southeast Asia remained a dangerous frontier. The Strait of Malacca, a narrow stretch of water between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, was, and remains, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. But in the late 40s, it was a lawless zone. The seas were littered with naval mines left over from the conflict. Piracy was rampant, and the colonial powers of Europe were struggling to maintain their grip on crumbling empires. It was an era of shadows, of black market smuggling, and of military secrets being trafficked across the dark water. It was in this tense, humid environment that two American vessels, the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star, along with several Dutch listening posts, picked up a radio signal that would chill the blood of every operator who heard it. The signal was not a standard status report. It was a frantic, disjointed Morse code transmission cutting through the static of the tropical air. The message began with a terrifying declaration: SOS, SOS. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Thus, possibly whole crew dead. Silence followed. A long, agonizing pause where the listeners on the other ships could only imagine the chaos unfolding on the sending vessel. Then, a final series of dots and dashes came through, tapped out with what seemed to be the last ounce of strength the operator possessed. 2 words: I die. Then, there was only the static hiss of the open ocean. Triangulating the position of the distress call, the merchant vessel Silver Star, under the command of Captain Houtman, changed course immediately. They had identified the source as the SS Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter. The name itself translates roughly to Man of Medan, referencing a large city on the island of Sumatra. As the Silver Star plowed through the swells, the crew prepared for a rescue mission, expecting perhaps a pirate attack, a boiler explosion, or a medical emergency. Nothing could have prepared them for the tableau of death that awaited them. When the Silver Star finally spotted the Ourang Medan, the sea was calm. The ship was drifting, its engines idle. There was no smoke, no sign of struggle, and no movement on the decks. It was merely bobbing in the gentle swell of the strait. The silence surrounding the vessel was unnatural, described by the rescue crew as a heavy, oppressive blanket. Captain Houtman tried to hail the vessel using the ship's whistle and loudspeakers, but there was no response. No sailors rushed to the rail, no flags were waved. Just the creaking of steel and the slap of water against the hull. A boarding party was assembled. As they lowered their lifeboat and rowed across the gap between the ships, the heat of the day was sweltering. The sun beat down on the rusty hull of the Ourang Medan, baking whatever secrets lay inside. As the men climbed the ladder and stepped onto the deck, they were immediately assaulted by a sight that defied all logic. The decks were littered with bodies, but these were not bodies of men who had died in battle. There were no bullet holes, no stab wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma. The crew of the Ourang Medan, Dutch sailors, officers, and even the ship's dog lay scattered about the vessel. Their postures were the stuff of nightmares. Every single corpse was frozen in a grotesque tableau of terror. Their faces were upturned toward the blazing sun, mouths gaping open in silent screams, eyes staring wide and bulging from their sockets. Their arms were outstretched, as if fending off some invisible, a horrific attacker that had descended upon them from the sky or risen from the deep. The boarding party moved deeper into the ship, their boots clanking on the metal plates, the sound echoing through the tomb-like vessel. They found the captain on the bridge, slumped over. The other officers were piled near the chart room and the wheelhouse, their bodies twisted in the same defensive, terrified rigor. The ship's dog was found frozen mid-snarl, teeth bared at an enemy that wasn't there. Perhaps the most chilling discovery was in the radio room. The operator, the man who had tapped out that final, haunting message, was found dead at his station. His hand was still on the telegraph key, his eyes wide open, staring at the wall, his face contorted in a mask of absolute agony and fear. Despite the tropical heat of the Strait of Malacca, and where temperatures regularly soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the boarding party reported a deep, penetrating chill in the lower bowels of the ship. In the boiler room, where the furnaces should have made the air unbearable, the temperature was reportedly near freezing. The bodies found there were preserved just as perfectly, just as terrifyingly as those on the deck. The captain of the Silver Star decided that the Ourang Medan needed to be towed to the nearest port for a full investigation. This was a crime scene of unprecedented proportions, or perhaps a medical quarantine zone. They began to attach tow lines, securing the ghost ship to the Silver Star. However, the ocean, or perhaps the ship itself, had other plans. Moments after the tow lines were attached, a thick, monacrid smoke began to billow from cargo hold number 4. It wasn't the gray smoke of a wood fire, but a dense, unnatural cloud. The crew of the Silver Star barely had time to react. Recognizing the imminent danger, Captain Houtman ordered the tow lines cut immediately. The boarding party scrambled back to their vessel, rowing furiously away from the Dutch freighter. They had barely put a safe distance between themselves and the Ourang Medan when the explosion occurred. It was a blast of tremendous force, lifting the freighter almost entirely out of the water. The ship broke its back. Fire consumed the superstructure instantly. Within minutes, the SS Ourang Medan, along with its frozen crew and whatever terrible secret it carried in its hold, slipped beneath the waves. It sank rapidly, leaving no debris, no bodies, and no evidence for the authorities to examine. This dramatic conclusion is where the mystery transforms from a ghost story into a complex investigation of history conspiracy, and maritime law. Because when investigators tried to look into the background of the SS Ourang Medan, they hit a wall. First, let us look at the official records, or rather, the lack thereof. Lloyd's Register of Shipping, the definitive catalog of all merchant vessels, had no record of a ship named the Ourang Medan. There were no construction records, no port authority logs, and no ownership papers filed under that name. To the bureaucratic world, the ship never existed. This fact alone has led many skeptics to dismiss the entire event as a maritime legend, a tall tale spun by sailors over grog. However, dismissal is too easy, and the accounts from the Silver Star were detailed. The Coast Guard hearings regarding the incident, though obscure, suggest that something happened out there. This leads us to the first and most prominent theory, one that explains the secrecy, the deaths, and the explosion. The theory of illicit cargo. We must remember the context of 1947. Japan had just fallen. During the war, the Japanese Imperial Army, specifically the horrific Unit 731, had developed biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction. They experimented with bubonic plague, anthrax, and various nerve agents. When the war ended, these stockpiles didn't just vanish. There is a strong historical hypothesis that the Ourang Medan was a smuggler's vessel. Operating off the books, he had tasked with transporting hazardous materials from clandestine Japanese laboratories in China or Southeast Asia to a destination unknown, possibly for the U.S. military or a black market buyer. Let us analyze the forensic evidence provided by the eyewitnesses through the lens of chemical exposure. The crew died with no visible external injuries. They died quickly, almost instantly, freezing in place. This pattern is consistent with exposure to certain nerve agents or extreme asphyxiants. One specific substance often cited by researchers of this case is potassium cyanide, or perhaps nitroglycerin. However, a more compelling theory involves a cocktail of nerve gas and sulfuric acid. If the ship was carrying unsecured chemicals in the hold, specifically hold number 4 where the smoke originated, seawater entering the hull could have triggered a fatal reaction. Consider the layout of a tramp steamer. If a container of potassium cyanide broke and mixed with seawater or with sulfuric acid, it would release a cloud of hydrogen cyanide gas. This gas is invisible and deadly. It interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen. The victims would effectively suffocate while breathing fresh air. This creates a sensation of extreme panic and air hunger, which would explain the open mouths and the terrified expressions. It causes immediate paralysis of the respiratory system and rapid death. Furthermore, if the ship was carrying nitroglycerin, a highly unstable explosive liquid, if the slightest vibration or shift in temperature could cause a detonation. The coldness reported in the boiler room is harder to explain chemically, but rapid depressurization of certain gas canisters can cause a precipitous drop in temperature, creating a localized freeze. If the Ourang Medan was indeed a ghost runner, a ship with a fake name used to transport illegal chemical weapons, it explains why there is no official record. It was designed to be deniable. The governments involved, likely the Dutch or the Americans, would have wiped the records to avoid a Geneva Convention violation scandal. The explosion that conveniently destroyed the evidence fits perfectly with a scuttling charge or chemical reaction gone wrong. Researcher Roy Bainton, who spent years digging into this mystery, He found distinct threads leading to the idea that the ship was actually named something else. Perhaps a vessel called the Sumatra, and Ourang Medan was merely a distress designator or a misinterpretation. Bainton discovered a booklet from 1954 titled The Death Ship of the South Seas, written by a man named Otto Mielke. Mielke seemed to know intricate details about the ship's route, cargo, and tonnage. Details that suggest he had access to a crew member of the Silver Star. Mielke explicitly mentioned potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. But we must also address the paranormal theories, for they hold a significant place in the lore of the Ourang Medan. The sheer uncanniness of the frozen faces has led many to speculate about phenomena beyond our current scientific understanding. In the late 1940s, the world was just beginning to talk about unidentified flying objects. The famous Roswell incident occurred in July of 1947, the same year as the Ourang Medan tragedy. Proponents of the paranormal theory suggest that the crew encountered a UFO, or an underwater submerged object, a USO. The logic follows that the ship was buzzed by a craft emitting high-frequency radiation, or infrasound. Infrasound, sound waves below the frequency of human hearing, can cause feelings of dread, terror, and nausea. At high enough intensities, it can cause internal organ rupture or death. This would explain the lack of external wounds and the look of terror, as the crew would have felt an overwhelming sense of doom before dying. Others look to the natural world. The Strait of Malacca is a geologically active zone. But could a massive release of methane gas from the ocean floor, a phenomenon known as a methane hydrate eruption, be the culprit? If a giant bubble of methane rose from the depths, it would engulf the ship. Methane is less dense than air. If the ship sailed into a cloud of it, the engines would stall due to lack of oxygen, explaining why the ship was drifting. The crew would asphyxiate almost instantly. Furthermore, methane is highly flammable. A single spark in a methane-rich environment would cause a massive explosion, exactly like the one that destroyed the vessel. The only flaw in this theory is the frozen nature of the bodies, as methane asphyxiation usually leads to unconsciousness first, not a rigor-like pose of defense. We must also consider the possibility of a pure hoax. Is it possible that the SS Ourang Medan never existed at all? Skeptics point to the timeline discrepancies. Some reports say June 1947, others say February 1948. The first widespread mention of the story appeared in a series of articles in a Dutch-Indonesian newspaper, followed by a piece in an American magazine called The Locomotive. It has been suggested that a man named Silvio Shirley, based in Trieste, Italy, may have fabricated the story and sold it to various newspapers. Trieste was a hub of maritime commerce and rumors. It is plausible that Shirley took bits and pieces of real maritime accidents, a suffocation here, an explosion there, and wove them into the ultimate sea mystery. The lack of registration for the ship supports this. If the ship never existed, there would be no registration. However, the hoax theory struggles to explain the persistence of the Silver Star crew's testimony. While official logs of the Silver Star from that specific voyage are difficult to obtain due to the passage of time and corporate mergers, the oral history passed down through merchant marine circles remains consistent. Sailors are a superstitious lot, but they are also practical. The specific details, the boiler room chill, the dead dog, the lack of injuries, are oddly specific for a generic ghost story. Usually, sea legends involve ghosts, disappearing crews, or madness, not specific symptoms of chemical asphyxiation. Let us return to the most chilling aspect, the silence. If this was a cover-up, it was a masterpiece. In 1947, the Cold War was freezing over. The Dutch were fighting a losing war to keep Indonesia, and the Americans were securing their influence in the Pacific. A ship carrying Japanese Unit 731 bioweapons, commandeered by an American or Dutch crew, sailing under a false flag, fits the geopolitical puzzle perfectly. If the cargo was leaking, the captain would have ordered the radio operator to send the SOS. But he couldn't reveal the nature of the cargo over open airwaves for fear of international incident. So they died in silence, knowing that help would arrive too late. The unknown attacker they were fending off was the air itself, turning poisonous in their lungs. The chill in the boiler room could have been a hallucination induced by hypoxia, or a chemical reaction that is endothermic, absorbing heat rapidly. The explosion was the final failsafe. If the chemicals became unstable, and the ship was designed to self-destruct to prevent the cargo from reaching shore or being analyzed. So, where does that leave us today? The wreckage of the Ourang Medan, if it exists, lies somewhere on the bottom of the Strait of Malacca. The strait is shallow in some parts, but deep in others, and the currents are strong. Sediment shifts rapidly. A steel ship that blew apart in 1947 would be a rusted skeleton today, buried under decades of silt, indistinguishable from the hundreds of other wrecks in that graveyard of ships. Modern diving expeditions have never located the vessel. But without a precise location, looking for it is like looking for a needle in a haystack that spans hundreds of miles. The legacy of the Ourang Medan is one of cautionary terror. It serves as a grim reminder of the post-war chaos, where the line between military operation and criminal smuggling was blurred. It reminds us that the ocean is the ultimate destroyer of evidence. Did the crew of the Ourang Medan stare into the face of aliens? Did they succumb to a bubble of methane gas? Or were they the tragic victims of man's inhumanity to man, pawns in a game of chemical warfare that required their silence? The image of the radio operator, hand frozen on the key, tapping out, "I die," is a testament to the ultimate human drive to communicate, even in the face of inevitable doom. He wanted someone to know. He wanted the world to hear the end of their story. We may never have the physical evidence, the smoking gun or the rusted hull, but the story persists because it touches on a primal fear. The fear of the invisible killer. The fear of being alone on the vast ocean, or in the fear that our governments are keeping secrets that could kill us. The Strait of Malacca continues to churn, carrying thousands of ships every day over the grave of the man of Medan. The waves wash over the mystery, keeping the truth suspended in the deep, dark blue. This has been a deep dive into the archives of the unexplained here at DCF Investigations. We have walked the deck of the ghost ship, looked into the frozen eyes of the crew, and watched the evidence burn. Now, I turn the investigation over to you. Do you believe the SS Ourang Medan was a victim of a paranormal event? Or was it a cold, calculated cover-up of a chemical weapons transport gone wrong? And if it was a hoax, why has the story survived with such specific, consistent details for over 70 years? Let us know your verdict in the comments below. The truth is out there. perhaps buried under the silt of the Sumatra coast, waiting for the right current to uncover it. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and stay safe.